powerful executive at Tesla and one of Elon Musk's closest confidants, has left the company, the latest high-profile departure during a volatile period for Tesla. Tesla stock is little changed. Sources tell the Wall Street Journal CoreWeave is in talks to acquire Core Scientific. No details yet, but Core Scientific has been growing fast. Core Scientific is one of the largest owners and operators of high-powered digital infrastructure for Bitcoin mining and hosting services in North America. CoreWeave is a cloud infrastructure provider for AI. CoreWeave shares are down more than 1%. Core Scientific shares now up 31%. The Supreme Court, in a 6-3 ruling, says the Medicaid Act does not give beneficiaries a privately enforceable right to choose a specific provider. That decision allows the state of South Carolina to block Medicaid funds from going to Planned Parenthood for cancer screenings, contraception, and wellness checks. It sets a precedent to allow states to cut off Medicaid funding for Planned Parenthood, even if it's not for abortion services. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Let's go back to Bloomberg Business Week Daily with Carol Masser and Tim Stenivek.
All right, Amy, thank you so much. All right, folks, Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s Vaccine Advisory Committee recommended Merck's shot to prevent newborns from getting RSV. At the same time,
that's a big deal.
I know
RSV
it's a big deal
for kids. I mean,
it's right.
Yeah,
right.
It's scary stuff.
Like when we talk about, at least in the past, when we've talked about the importance of RSV, we talk about the importance from kids. You know that you've had little ones.
Yeah, and I think this is pretty new. Like we haven't been able to get this for my kids.
You have not.
Not this early. Yeah.
Not this early. All right. And then we also had the vaccine panel moving to restrict the use of some flu shots for Americans. And then one more thing, Tim, we had the actual Health and Human Services Secretary come out and say that the U.S. will cut funding to the organization responsible for vaccinating children in poor countries. So it's a move that some experts say will result in unnecessary deaths. So there's a lot going on in this space, something that I think we just take for granted in terms of vaccines, but there's some debate over it.
Well, here in the studio with more on these developments and more, Bloomberg News health reporter Damien Gardet joins us in the Bloomberg Business Week studio. I kind of want to start a little bit back in time. I think this is yesterday's news, and then we can get to everything that happened today. The questions over the vaccine schedule for kids. This is something that anybody who has a young kid knows. You look at this thing, your doctor looks at this thing and says, okay, these are the recommended vaccines at this age. They work in tandem sort of with the American Academy of Pediatrics, I believe. What's happening with this from Washington right now?
Right. So the American vaccine schedule is recommended by the CDC, not required. But I think for most people, you just kind of go with what your pediatrician tells you, and that's where it comes from. What we learned yesterday is that the CDC's group of vaccine advisors intends to reopen the book on the vaccine schedule, which in the abstract, kicking the tires scientifically on something like that seems perfectly reasonable. The reason for the alarm that you may have heard from public health officials is that this is a handpicked group by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who famously has advanced and espoused debunked theories about the safety of vaccines going back to the 1990s, if not before. So people are reading the tea leaves. Is this an attack on the vaccination of young kids, which is something Kennedy has fixated on for many years and tied various vaccines to the development of autism and other issues for which there is just no evidence? So the concern is that when they reopen the book, their consideration of the evidence behind, for example, the measles vaccine or anything else that's recommended for young kids will not be even-handed, and that this could be a kind of breadcrumb trail to a dismantling of public health in the United States.
Well, how does it work in the panel? What evidence are they looking at? What research are they looking at? What goes into determining their decision, or is it kind of how they feel?
It's pretty rigorous. So there's a multi-step process. Any new vaccine, which at some point each of these vaccines was new, must first win approval from the FDA, which looks at safety and efficacy also pretty rigorously. And then it goes to this panel of independent advisors to the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. They pour over even more of that data and look at things beyond what the FDA looks at, including the cost and cost effectiveness of these things and real world evidence as to how safe they are, how well they prevent disease, and what side effects they may have.
The U.S. does not have the only children in the world.
Right.
There are children all over the world. I'm wondering how the U.S. vaccine schedule is different than vaccine schedules in other parts of the world.
So at least against like the big vaccinate against about 15 of the same childhood diseases. There is some difference in like hepatitis A, hepatitis B, basically based on prevalence in different countries. Some countries that's more of a risk for young kids than it is in others for all kinds of reasons. The number of individual shots you get varies, and the US has more of those than, for example, Germany or the United Kingdom. This is a little bit in the weeds. Even though we're vaccinating against largely the same diseases, in Europe there are more combination vaccines that we don't necessarily use in the US. So the number of needles varies, but I would say by and large, Japan, other comparable nations, we are trying to prevent the same diseases in our kids.
So they're basically giving a shot that may cover numerous things.
Right.
Whereas we are doing individual shots.
Yeah.
Why is there a difference?
You know,
I mean, if I have a little critter, I don't want to
Fewer needles, the better.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, it really does.
I did have a little critter. She's a big critter now, but I mean, yeah, like that was something you wanted to limit as much as possible.
Right, and it boils down to basically, you know, the way that like reasonable people can disagree. Different groups of experts will look at safety and risk and cost differently. So one example is measles. In the United States, we recommend the MMR vaccine, which is measles, mumps, and rubella, and then the chickenpox vaccine separately. There is a vaccine that has all four of those things together. It can lead to, in small numbers of cases, seizures. And the CDC decided years and years ago, better to do them MMR plus V is what they call it. Overseas, it's largely, or in many cases, MMRV. And there are other cases like that, where basically reasonable people, sort of equivalents of the CDC in countries around the world, came to different considerations. And some of this does have to do with cost.
Does it seem like the Secretary of Health and Human Services is fulfilling promises that he made as he was testifying? If we remember back a few months ago, it was pretty contentious, and there were some holdouts who ultimately ended up supporting him because they said, hey, he will not do the things that the worst critics are saying he will do.
Right. The short answer is no. I mean, one specific case is, as you mentioned, it was Senator Bill Cassidy from Louisiana, who ended up being...
Who's a doctor.
Who is a doctor, and clearly was, or at least in public, seemed very pained over this vote, over whether to confirm Kennedy, and ended up being basically the deciding vote as a result. And in order to get that vote, according to Cassidy, Kennedy promised him explicitly that he would not mess with this particular committee on the CDC.
Oops.
Now that's according to that's according to Cassidy. Kennedy did not, to my knowledge, say that publicly, but I think we can trust the senator, or at least we have little choice but to. Cut to this June, Kennedy fired all 17 of the standing members of this committee and replaced them with 8 people, one of whom resigned before the first meeting. So the remaining 7, and they include people with non-traditional backgrounds, not necessarily MDs or vaccine experts, and in a few cases, people who have, like Kennedy, echoed those debunked claims about vaccines causing autism or other safety risks.
Well, some would say that a panel should have diverse points of view, right? So that you get a healthier debate. Having said that, is it typical that an administration changes this panel completely? I mean, it does change over time, right?
It does. They're appointed to 4-year terms by Health and Human Services secretaries, and it's considered, serving on this committee is like a real badge of honor in public health. Whether you're a vaccinologist, a pediatrician, a registered nurse, it's almost like a minor league baseball system. You will serve on the working groups that serve this committee, and then to be selected
there's a farm team,
is an honor. It kind of, yes. So to liquidate, maybe not the right term, to fire outright all of the standing members and replace them, that is unprecedented.
Go ahead.
The one thing I wanted to get to is that they may not provide the U.S. funding for vaccinating children in poor countries. As we learned with the pandemic, pandemic doesn't know a border. And I wonder about this. So what's top of mind for you? And forgive us, it's only 30 seconds.
No, that's all right. The separate issue, so as you mentioned, Kennedy announced that the United States will no longer fund Gavi, a program that was founded in part by the United States to vaccinate children around the world. This is cause for serious alarm around the globe. As you noted, the next COVID is not something that will just stop because of a border. We need to see what the knock-on effects of this are, but I think, the United States pulling out of funding as the major funder is a serious concern.
Who needs ChatGPT? We just need Damien. Thank you so much. Damien Gardet, Bloomberg News health reporter. Coming up, check on trading some stocks on the move. This is Bloomberg Business Week Daily.
Asia is a continent of contrasts. The region is a nexus of rich cultural traditions and a vibrant hub of trailblazing innovation and modernity. How will it push the limits of technology even further?
Going to space should become as easy as, taking a flight.
If NASA is designing a lander, their approach is they're designing a Formula One car. So we take, say, a Jeep approach.
Minso, give us a sense of how you translate Korean architecture for the rest of the world.
We call this madang. In general terms, it's where we can be ourselves, where we belong.
There is an old saying in Korea that says, "거미 불루, 화이 불치." It means simple but not humble. So it has a tremendous impact on Korean architecture.
People tend to think the robot AI taking the job from them. We want to use the robot as a basic asset, meaning people have an income through the robot.
From space tech in India to robotics in Japan, Asia is driving the future, reshaping industries, societies, and the way we live. Join me as I take you through the bold innovations. Discover Asia's next-gen technologies on Momentum.
Good morning. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Welcome back to the opening trade. Watch Bloomberg Tech. This is the Asia Trade.
This is Wall Street Week. Welcome to Balance of Power.
This is Bloomberg Television. The multi-trillion-dollar industry. We'll show you what's happening in ETFs like no one else. ETF IQ, Mondays on Bloomberg. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week Daily with Carol Masser and Tim Stennebeck on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
All right, everybody, we're coming up with just about an hour to go till we wrap up trade on this Thursday, but we've got a rally underway. We're rolling off our best levels of the session. What does that mean? We are still up about 45 points on the S&P 500, 6137. We need a few more points to take out a new record on the S&P 500. NASDAQ 100 at another record close on track for is up about 0.9%, a gain, Tim, of 201 points to the upside. And you've got the Dow, if you're interested, 372 points higher. It's up almost 0.9%.
The highest that the S&P 500 saw today was 6144.
That's it.
That was a record.
Yep.
The last record.
So intraday.
Intraday, yeah. The last record
close.
Was back in February.
Correct. And that, I think, was...
Yes, go on.
Hang on, I had it at the top of the show.
6137? Is that right?
I had it 6144.
6144.
On February 19th. I think that was the record close.
Okay, so record. Okay, interesting. Okay, so 6144 66. You got a lot of screens up here, people.
Don't you guys work at Bloomberg? You have a lot of information at your fingers. Okay, just ignore us. I'm Carol Masser along with Tim Stennebeck. Let's get to some stocks on the move.
With us is Bloomberg News cross-asset reporter Denitsa Sakova. Denitsa, Coinbase is the company that you got on your radar today. How come?
I'm going to stay on the topic of new records. And Coinbase actually hasn't hit a new record for 3 years, actually more than 3 years. And potentially today we're set for a record. It's of course coming on growing acceptance of cryptocurrency in Washington. We've had that stablecoin bill, and we've talked a lot about Circle, which has been on a crazy rally, but that's not the only company. Coinbase shares have surged more than 1,000% from late 2022, which of course is the collapse of FTX. And it felt at that time, that 1,000% rally is never happening. Clearly, we were wrong. That rally is happening, and the final leg has occurred as the U.S. Senate is passing legislation for stablecoins pegged to the dollars. That has been a new round of enthusiasm, especially in a place where crypto enthusiasm wasn't a big thing in Washington. So that's definitely helped. And just to show you how bullish the street is, we have a target of $510 from Bernstein Analyst. The current price is $379. So 510, that's a crazy rally.
1,064% up from December 28th, 2022. That's a lot.
That's wild. I think there were a lot of people back then. And remember the last record, it's been years, as Denitsa said, a lot of people back then were like, does the industry even recover post FTX?
I mean,
it's come back with a vengeance.
It's such a warmer environment, right? The sentiment has changed dramatically.
It's very different when you have supporters in Washington.
All right. Coin,
very good point.
Coin, of course, the ticker, as you said, up 6.6%. Let's go to Penn Entertainment. Ticker is PENN.
Yeah, we're moving into casino. The stock is up 4.9%, and there is also some analyst optimism there. It's coming from Citizen, which raised their recommendation to market outperform. Penn Entertainment has faced a lot of headwinds. They had a big partnership with ESPN, which actually the industry hasn't been too bullish about it because it didn't do that well financially. Now Citizen is actually seeing many catalysts: casino operating growth, shareholder returns. They're pretty negative about what has happened recently. They said the company has overpromised and under-delivered. So pretty harsh tone about what is in the past, but clearly a lot of optimism about the future. That deal we were talking about with ESPN, that was like a $2 billion licensing agreement. And actually in that note, Citizen mentioned that as a bullish catalyst, that ESPN does not extend if ESPN doesn't extend the deal after 2026, that's a bullish catalyst. The stock was down 87% from all-time high, so this is a much needed relief, the 5% boost today. It has 11 buy ratings, 11 hold ratings, and zero sells. So there isn't too much negativism there, but clearly it needs some pressure on that side.
This used to be $136 a share stock. It's now about 18 and change.
Yeah.
Just giving you a little context.
Everything Denitsa has today is a gainer.
She does.
Only good news.
We like that.
Come on.
All right.
Well,
yeah.
We like that if we have to choose gainers later.
So sorry, although I'm listening to these and I'm like, darn, why didn't I choose this one? I did not choose this one, but it's a good one, Meta.
That one has been on a tear. It's been up 50% since the April low. That's incredible. Mm-hmm. Today we have advanced talks to acquire PlayAI, which is a small startup using artificial intelligence to replicate voices. The ticker, of course, is META. The stock is up 3% today. This is part of like a massive effort by Meta to acquire AI talent.
They are on a spending spree, man.
They are.
What do you think about the idea of replicating voices?
I don't know. What do you feel about the idea of
It's a little scary.
It's so scary.
Is that a little scary?
I'm terrified, honestly. And I looked at the app. It says, unlike traditional speech models, Play Dialogue excels in understanding context and responding with nuanced emotion, enabling an unparalleled human-like conversation.
So I guess the answer to can it be programmed to love is yes.
I guess so.
Oh my God. I'm a little fearful of what's to come. We gotta leave it there. Denitsa, thank you so much. Bloomberg News cross-asset reporter Denitsa Sikova. For more conversations, check out our Stock Movers podcast, 5-minute episodes of the biggest winners and losers. You can find it on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere you get your podcast. For those watching on TV, the close is coming your way. What are we doing?
We got Mark Morial from the National Urban League joining us a little later on the program. Do not miss it. The close is next.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute economic news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Jennifer Zabasaja in Cape Town, South Africa, and this is Bloomberg.
The countdown is on. Everything you need to get the edge at the end of the market day. This is the close.
FOMO sets in and the market takes off. Live from Studio 2 here at Bloomberg headquarters in New York.
We're taking a flight.
If NASA is designing a lander, their approach is they're designing it. If NASA is designing a lander, their approach is they're designing it.
But the S&P 500, again, revisiting those highs from February, and at its high was about
taking a flight.
If NASA is designing a lander, their approach is they're designing it. If NASA is designing a lander, their approach is they're designing it. If NASA
markets rally is a function of believing the Fed is going to imminently step in and cut rates. I think it's confidence in the Fed, at least at this point, sort of digging their heels in, suggesting that neither side of their dual mandate is suggestive of much easier policy.
A great explanation there and a bit of a contrarian one. Now, to be sure, the record rally is not without its detractors. While the S&P is a smidge from reclaiming that all-time high, only 2 of the 11 S&P sectors, industrials and technology, are at records themselves. Furthermore, you have 50% of the index's point move since that April low, attributable to just 10 stocks, including NVIDIA, Microsoft, JP Morgan, and Netflix. And that's not all. The percentage of S&P members trading above their 200-day moving average, that's actually gone down since mid-May, and an equal-weighted version of the S&P is still almost 4% away from getting back to that peak from November. Dan Wojtropski, technical strategist over at Janney Montgomery Scott, I thought put it best, Scarlett, saying if breadth does not follow the breakouts in the S&P and NASDAQ, we should maybe be on the watch for a correction?
Well, I mean, certainly this binary outcome is something that we've all been on the watch out for. And that's in part because the stock market's price action doesn't really necessarily align with the release of economic data. Take a look at the blue line. That is the S&P 500 here. The white line is the Economic Surprise Index. And when this line goes down, as it has been since late May here, that means data releases are trailing the consensus estimate from economists. On the whole, economic data have been coming in softer than expected. The S&P 500, meantime, you can see, has been building on its gains and, of course, reclaiming a 4-month high not so long ago and on track for a new record high as well. Romain?
All right, kicking us off to the close is Tanya Kandari, Deputy CIO of the Solutions and Multi-Asset Group at Morgan Stanley Investment Management. And Tanya, it's been a phenomenal run for stocks. I don't want to quibble about whether it was justified, but I do want to know if you think there is actually more room to run overall.
I think it's interesting that the difference between the hard data and the soft data, that disconnect has been the highest since 1970. So I think there can be a chance where some of the hard data converges and we see some more slowdown coming. There was a lot of front loading in ports, etc., because of the tariffs. We have July 9th coming. So I think one needs to be cautious and discerning in terms of what pockets of market one needs to get into. Before we had the correction earlier this year, we had a monster rally that was driven almost entirely by AI and the AI ecosystem, if you will. It looks like the resumption of this rally is also based on the structural idea that AI is here to stay, and more importantly, it is much broader than just buying chips from NVIDIA, that there is an investable universe of AI companies out there, and I wonder if you find that. Absolutely. Just like the electricity and internet is everywhere, AI is going to be everywhere, and that's the quest to find what is the next leg of that investment story. So I think one needs to look at it both in the business-to-business space and the business-to-consumer space. In the business-to-business, a lot of the enterprise companies that are offering horizontal solutions look great. In the consumer space, you have a lot of verticals that are using AI to harness their offerings and grow their TAM in music, in e-commerce, in different platforms, even on the factory floor with industrial software. So we're looking at this theme beyond just tech in the actual industry verticals across not just the US, but even in the international space that look really compelling at this stage. And one last thing I'd say, even in emerging markets, you can leapfrog the innovation, just like you never had banks in India, but you have a mobile phone. You could have native AI solutions and equivalents that can be a good productivity and market driver. That's a good point.
How do you determine the application of that technology, though, if not for the material benefits on the revenue and bottom line? Because if companies are applying that AI, that technology to their operations, do you rely on company management articulating that, or do you look for more concrete signs?
Yeah, I think at the outset, incumbency is an advantage, right? So if you're an incumbent in a vertical, for example, in, say, an industrial company that does a lot of the industrial electrification, capital goods kind of in that space, and you're able to deploy AI to enhance your cost efficiencies, which improves margins, or even expand your market by offering new innovations and applications based on that new AI application. So I think it's looking at the incumbent primarily as a starting point in different industry segments, and then really understanding at a micro level what they are saying and how they are really harnessing this.
So this idea of being more cautious and discerning about how the AI narrative applies to other parts of the market, how does that fit in with the overall macro environment, especially when it comes to rates, with so many people looking for rate cuts later on this year? Put that together.
Yeah, so I think the one interesting unknown is the productivity enhancement that the AI, all-encompassing AI will bring to the world, right? Both in the US and even outside. So if there is that productivity, which generally comes with a lag in past technology revolutions, it seems that it may come earlier because AI adoption has been much faster than the internet or the mobile adoption, etc. So that could be an important driver for costs, for interest rates, and therefore I'm not a strong believer of rising rates, because I do also believe that above 4.5% rates, which at inflation of 2 and a real rate of 2.5, at this level of debt in the global economy, that can be really, really constraining. So I do think that the overall impact of all of this on the rate situation is more down than up.
More down than up, but it also gets to the idea of where the global economy goes. And I know a lot of people think that, at least for now, we have some degree of stability that might actually keep the Fed at bay, whether they're going to raise or cut. Does that even matter, though? I mean, we've had this rally in absence to a certain degree of Fed support, I mean, at least of easier support. So why would we need it, say, I don't know, in 3 or 4 months?
I don't think really what really matters is not the level of rates, but it's the change and the change relative to expectations, which feeds into markets. So I think based on where we are, I think that expectation in terms of the cuts that are being priced in and what could potentially happen seem like the risk reward is balanced. So again, when there's a big disconnect between what the market's expecting and the actual outcome on rates, that's when the bigger moves in the market happen.
All right, Jitanya, always a great conversation. Jitanya Kandari, Deputy CIO of the Solutions and Multi-Asset Group at Morgan Stanley Investment Management, kicking us off to the close on what could be a record day for the S&P 500. When we come back, though, we are going to talk Hollywood and talk to one of the greatest documentary filmmakers of all time, R.J. Cutler. We're going to talk about Olivia Newton-John. We're going to talk about Martha Stewart and esports. Trust me, Scarlett, it'll all connect.
I can't wait. All right, let's stay with the movie magic, because we're going to be discussing Apple's test drive onto the big screen after the IMAX release of its new F1 movie with IMAX's CEO Richard Gelfond.
We're also on watch for Nike earnings, and, well, that's an excuse to talk to an icon in the sneaker industry. Dwayne Edwards going to be joining us a little bit later in the program. Stick with us. This is The Close on Bloomberg.
up-to-the-minute geopolitical news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Jumana Versace in Doha, Qatar, and this is Bloomberg.
Key investors, top executives, global innovators. Join me for in-depth conversations with the biggest newsmakers on the day's top stories. Insight with Haslinda Anand, only on Bloomberg.
I'm David Weston. Join me for the next generation of Wall Street Week. This week, whether we can trust the CBO predictions about the one big beautiful bill as Congress races toward a July 4 deadline, selling U.S. residency through President Trump's gold card, and what's at stake for business and the economy in the New York City mayoral election.
It seems to me that this is a maximally risky moment for New York City.
Watch the all-new Wall Street Week. More than what you need to know, it's what you need to think about. Join me each week on Wall Street Week for stories of capitalism from business, markets, economics, tech, and climate. More than what you need to know, it's what you need to think about.
The circuit is back. How confident are you that AI's promise will outweigh the perils?
I'm not confident.
Tune into Season 3 of The Circuit with me, Emily Chang, Thursdays at 6 p.m. Eastern on Bloomberg Originals and Bloomberg TV.
For today's Stock of the Hour, it's a twofer. Cloud company CoreWeave reportedly has its sights on buying blockchain and AI infrastructure player Core Scientific again. Core Scientific shares up right now, about 32% after the Wall Street Journal's report. The two companies have been working together since CoreWeave first approached Core Scientific last year for a deal that was turned down. Let's bring in Anurag Rana, senior tech analyst over at Bloomberg Intelligence. Anurag, CoreWeave made a bid last year for $5.75 a share. It was rejected as too low, and now Core Scientific is worth more than double that price. How much more is it willing to pay up here for a piece of Core Scientific?
I think if you see over the last 12 months, there has been a marked change in the AI infrastructure environment. When we saw back in January, everything fell apart with DeepSeek. People were extremely pessimistic about it. And then even when the CoreWeave IPO came out, it came out like well below where it's trading right now. I think it was roughly around $40 or so. But I would say in the last 2 months, the sentiment has changed completely. There has been a complete revival in this trade. On top of that, CoreWeave has gotten enough orders from all kind of cloud providers right now. So I think this is just their way of making sure that they can get enough capacity to fulfill that demand. And frankly speaking, given the enterprise value of CoreWeave, even if they pay a little bit extra, I don't think it matters.
I am curious about just the overall infrastructure build out and the idea of software companies that maybe were reliant on leasing out their own servers and other sort of data centers, whether we are going to see much more of a move to actually claim ownership of that.
See, Microsoft has said, very clearly that they're going to do both. They're going to build, but as well as they're going to lease. It depends on what kind of a workload it is, how much down the future you need this. And CoreWeave is providing a good service in between, because for those people who don't want to build it themselves, they want to just rent it out. These guys are creating a large infrastructure for that. So I think there's a space or a place for all the players in the market, whether it's Microsoft, AWS, or for that matter, CoreWeave.
So the two do have an existing partnership. They have a series of, I believe, 12-year contracts. How does CoreWeave convince Core Scientific that an outright acquisition would be in its best interests?
I think, one of the things you have to notice, if you're a small player, you require a lot of CapEx to grow. And in a good environment, maybe the CapEx was available and investors were willing to put a lot of money. But we also saw even CoreWeave had a very hard time during their IPO. So that may be, a reason behind other smaller players to say, we will look at consolidation in the industry. There will be a roll-up, and somebody like a CoreWeave would be involved in that roll-up.
All right, Anurag, always Rana, senior technology analyst over at Bloomberg Intelligence. A closer look there. You see shares of Core Scientific, which have been halted and then restarted, now up about 33%. CoreWeave only fractionally lower on the day. Some modest concerns about costs, but as Anurag just said there, Scarlett, he thinks that even at a premium valuation here, that most investors will probably take it in stride.
It feels like everyone's trying to get something in before July 9th comes around, when everything might go topsy-turvy again because the pause on the trade tariffs expire.
Yeah. Maybe. That's a whole other thing here. I do just want to bring some attention to our viewers, and I don't know if we can get Uber shares up on the screen, but we're actually starting to see shares of Uber spike higher here, now up about 3%. This on the back of a New York Times story that apparently says that Travis Kalanick, to a certain extent, might actually be back in the fold. According to the New York Times, Scarlett, they're saying that the ride-hailing company is in talks to help Travis Kalanick invest in an autonomous vehicle company called Pony AI. We talked a lot about this company. It's a Chinese company.
Yeah.
It's a Chinese company. This would be a deal for the U.S. arm of that company. And it really just gets to this idea of the intense competition right now in the self-driving ride-hailing space, obviously with Waymo making a lot of strides, and of course Tesla trying to make its stamp in the space as well.
Yeah, this feels like a bit of a soap opera here because Travis Kalanick was forced out in 2017, and his ties to the company, as as it stands with operations, is pretty much clear. But in that they were cut, but now you have him possibly being a partner in some way.
Yeah, we should point out shares of Pony, the ADRs, excuse me, of Pony AI here in the U.S. They're up about 16% right now. Ticker PONY, UBER. Keep an eye on that, and we'll bring you any updates as soon as we get them. When we come back, a broader conversation about the tech space with Dan Ives. This is Bloomberg.
In case you missed it on Balance of Power.
Administration officials have maintained today that the objective was solely to focus on Iran's nuclear capabilities, that this objective was not regime change. But, sir, even if it wasn't the objective, could that still be the end result, and how?
I think regime change has to be the objective because the Ayatollahs are never going to give up their pursuit of nuclear weapons. They have to be forced out of power. That's the only shot we have at really lasting peace and security in the Middle East. And a strike like this, and potentially others, can disrupt the regime, can destabilize it. Look at the choice that the top military officials and key Ayatollahs now have to face after the U.S. attack. Now they have to make a choice. Do they want to take on a second military adversary in the form of the United States? They may well do it, but they would be making a big mistake from the point of view of regime survival.
Don't miss Balance of Power live every weekday.
From the world of politics to the world of business, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines deliver news, insight, and analysis live 2 times a day, every trading day. Balance of Power at 1 and 5 Eastern, only on Bloomberg.
All right, time now for our top calls. Big movers on the back of analyst recommendations. And we start off with Unity Software. Bank of America reinstating coverage of the software graphics company with the underperform, the only sell equivalent among the 22 major sell-side analysts covering the stock. The price target set at a street low, $15 a share, with BofA saying Unity's content consumption strategy for its gaming engine is lagging. You see those shares down 3.5% on the day, on pace for their first monthly drop since March. Next up, Microsoft. Morgan Stanley raising its price target to $530 from $482 and maintaining an overweight rating. The analyst sees yields on Microsoft's investments in generative AI becoming increasingly apparent. Those shares on a 40% run from the April lows to a record high. And last up, Apple. JP Morgan cutting its price target to $230 from $240. The analyst saying demand for the next iPhone could actually be hurt by macro uncertainty as well as tariff headwinds that will lead to higher price tags for the devices. Those shares sitting out of today's rally down about 0.3%, and those are some of our top calls. Despite the softness that you're seeing in Apple, most of the tech space is rallying hard. In fact, a big part of the rally that we've seen off those April lows are because of big tech. Dan Ives covers that space better than anyone else as global head of technology research at Wedbush Securities. And Dan, I guess the big question everybody wants to know is how much life is there in this rally?
I think this is just starting in terms of this next stage of the AI revolution. And I think as we go into the software phase, you see on the consumer side when it comes to AI, I believe this is still bottom of the first, top of the second inning. And that's why NVIDIA, $4 trillion, ultimately $5 trillion. Microsoft, we think on the road to $4 and then $5 trillion. It's our view, this tech bull market, get the popcorn out, I think it's going to be a very strong second half.
There's only been a lot of talk about the big structural changes that AI is bringing, not only to the companies themselves, but potentially to the economy and to the markets. You're also seeing sort of a similar sort of run for the gold going on right now in the autonomous vehicle space. And there were just some headlines a while ago out of the New York Times that Uber has actually tapped its former CEO, its co-founder, Travis Kalanick, to potentially fund a deal to buy a company called Pony AI, which makes autonomous vehicles, the U.S. arm of Pony AI, I should say, that helps to make autonomous vehicles. I do want to get your thoughts on that deal and about the amount of money and effort that these companies are spending to get ahead in this self-driving ride-hailing space.
Look, that would be the smart move for Dara, and I think there could be more behind it. Because when you look at the next phase, when it goes to physical AI, it's about autonomous. And Uber, when you look at Tesla shot across the bow, everything we saw in Austin, that's now started to play there. Uber needs to definitely focus on partnerships and expanding their repertoire when it comes to autonomous. This would be a smart strategic move, aggressive if they did it.
How important is that first mover advantage that Tesla and that Waymo currently enjoy?
Yeah, look, first mover advantage is important in terms of Waymo, but the reality is those are $230,000 cars in 4 to 5 cities. It's all about scale. That's what Tesla's going after. And that's why Uber, they can't just sit there and Darren knows this on the treadmill. They're going to have to aggressively focus on their fleet and what they could do when it comes to autonomous. And I think that's going to be the next chapter when it comes to AI, but it speaks broadly to our view of tech, from robotics to autonomous to enterprise to consumer AI across the board. I mean, this is, I believe it's a golden age for tech.
So when it comes to funding something like this, how much are investors going to be comfortable with that without seeing a return on investment in the immediate near term? Because that was a question when it came to building up the AI data centers and the AI capabilities. And at some point, investors were willing to give the companies the benefit of the doubt until it became clear that the spending wasn't resulting in anything tangible.
Yeah, and then obviously you start to see it come through. And that's why the last thing investors want to see, you don't want to see them on the outside looking in. I think that's why Apple's underperformed, right? Because the reality is when we were at WWDC, the AI strategy, right, it was kind of a shrug the shoulders. Investors right now know this is a Game of Thrones arms race that's going on when it comes to AI. Stronger going to get stronger when it comes to tech. But that's why look what's happened with Nadella and Redmond. They're just getting stronger and stronger when it comes to AI because they recognize where the next steps are. That's look at names like Palantir, the Messi of AI. It shows this is not stopping. Tech needs to continue to spend.
I am curious, Dan, how you value these companies. I know there's been a lot of talk about how traditional valuation metrics and multiples don't necessarily apply, at least to some of these companies, don't necessarily apply in the same way that we have in the past. But of course, that doesn't stop the bears and the naysayers from looking at those traditional multiples and saying, look, I mean, there may be a future here, but at least current pricing seems to suggest that some of these stocks are way overvalued.
Yeah, and look, the haters, I mean, they'll sit there, those bears sitting in the hibernation caves, right? They can't find AI in the spreadsheets. But it's our view. You have to look out 3, 5, 7 years, what the monetization opportunities looks like. If you believe on the consumer side, the next stage of AI, then Meta is a 4-digit stock. But it speaks to my view that if you just focus on 1-year valuation, you miss every transformational growth stock the last 20 years.
You mentioned Meta as a winner here. We're paying attention to Uber. What's a company that people are not paying enough attention to that could be a stealth winner here?
I mean, I think it's IBM. I think there's a renaissance that's happening at IBM in our monk. I think Arvind's doing a great job, and that's further and further monetization. I think institution that's still very under-owned, taking a page out of Microsoft's playbook, and I think it just shows you're now seeing tech spread to the second, third, fourth derivatives. That's why we have our Ives AI 30. It's not just about 2, 3 names. Of course, it's led by Godfather of AI, Jensen, NVIDIA, but it's spreading to the rest of tech, and that's why it continues to be 10 p.m. in the AI party that goes to 4 a.m.
All right, Dan Ives, Managing Director and Global Head of Technology Research at Wedbush Securities.
You know, as somebody who goes to bed at 10 p.m., that's kind of worrying for me. But I get to his point. And I think it's interesting, too, how you brought up IBM. I mean, that hit a record high on Tuesday. And yesterday, we were talking about Micron. I know the shares are down a little bit today. But the idea that some of these old tech companies, and Oracle, for example, are really benefiting from this new tech of AI.
Well, or people are just looking for new names to bet on. I mean, IBM is up 33% this year. And if you look over the past 12 months, months, it's actually up 75% total return versus 22% gain for the Mag 7.
Yeah, and some of it, though, it's not just window dressing. I mean, these companies have the capabilities. A lot of people remember when Larry Ellison walked out with Trump for the whole Stargate initiative. Everyone was like, why is Oracle there? And it was like, well, there's only a few companies that have the capabilities to build these things in the scale
like, it's our turn now.
To do. Yeah.
All right, coming up, we're going to speak to award-winning filmmaker R.J. Cutler about his latest project, a docu-series covering the inaugural Esports World Cup. This is The Close on Bloomberg.
When you have drugs that are very, very popular, you often have people that make counterfeit or copycat drugs. What about for this? Do you have to worry about counterfeit drugs coming in that are trying to say the same thing?
It's a terrible problem right now, actually, because I think consumers don't really know the dangers or the difference. Today, the FDA and the government has allowed this to sort of grow. And of course, a weight loss medication that's effective would be a popular thing for people to go around the healthcare system and seek treatment on their own. But the data we have is that 80% of these medicines are coming out of China from unapproved and unregulated sources. We recently, with Borders and Customs, seized a big batch that was shipped in dog food. People then reformulate them and sell them locally in med spas and other outfits, but you really don't know what's in that vial. We buy them and test them. We find bacteria, plant material, viruses, fungus. You do not want to be using them.
But how much more expensive are your drugs than the counterfeit ones? In other words, if somebody wants to use your product, Zepbound, how much does it cost a month?
You can buy Zepbound direct from Lilly for $3.99 for the starter dose.
$3.99?
No.
No.
This is a valuable innovation, David.
In case you missed it, on Bloomberg Open Interest, this data from Trump's trade war, what are you seeing in your district?
Businesses are afraid to accelerate. By and large, they're pulling over and putting on the hazards.
You're constantly speaking to businesses. Is anyone making big investments?
Inflation is a big bugaboo. There's no evidence yet that inflation-driven drop in sentiment drops spending. That's why I say there's the disconnect on the consumer side.
Don't miss Open Interest live weekdays.
Didn't really think I had a problem.
I would isolate, self-medicate.
Like 48.5 million Americans, they didn't choose addiction. Go to shatterproof.org/findstreatment. Watch the film No More Secrets and find out how you can get help. That's shatterproof.org/findtreatment.
U.S. jobs numbers are released. Bloomberg has the report under surveillance with crucial data and expert analysis at terminal speed. Nobody covers Jobs Day like Bloomberg.
3:30 p.m. here in New York. This is the countdown to the close. I'm Romaine Bostic.
And I'm Scarlett Fu.
You know, Scarlett, I was taking a look at some interesting statistics about, what we stream on television, what we see in the movies, and I know you're a big streamer here.
Yeah, and you don't watch anything.
It's probably no secret that documentaries sort of just rule everything right now. And I saw this interesting stat that it says that basically since 2019, just in the last 6 years, that the number of first-run unscripted shows, so effectively documentaries, has risen from less than 600 to more than 1,300 right now.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And I think once people hook on to someone that they're interested in, then they go, down the rabbit hole and are looking for anything they can get their hands on because they're so fascinated by that person. And something like a documentary really puts it all in context in one place.
And well, our next guest, he knows a lot about that. He is an award-winning documentary filmmaker covering several subjects. Dick Cheney, Anna Wintour, who else am I forgetting here? Quite a few other folks here. And Martha Stewart, thank you very much. And his latest project is on esports. In fact, the Esports World Cup Level Up, which tracks several players who are competing in the 8-week tournament that kicks off next week in Saudi Arabia. Pleased to say that RJ Cutler joins us right now, the founder of This Machine Filmworks. RJ, great to have you here. Let's talk about esports for a second here because, a few years ago, I don't think a documentary like this would have gotten much traction, but esports has become a big deal. Obviously, this World Cup, the second year that we've had it right now, kicks off, I believe, the first week of July over in Saudi Arabia. You had a chance to spend a lot of time with these players. What was the biggest takeaway that you had when watching these folks compared to some of the other documentary subjects that you've had?
Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me. We are very excited about this series that's on Amazon Prime. Folks can watch, as of this weekend, all 5 episodes that tell the story of the very first World Cup season, which was last year. And what we learned is that we're dealing with world-class athletes who are at the top of their game. It's not the cliche of gamers who are kind of, buried in their basement and not big personalities. You're talking about players whose profiles and fans whose passion and enthusiasm is as strong as you would see in the NBA today, and then as strong as you were seeing last week during the NBA Finals. They're incredible characters with high stakes stories to tell who are playing for not just national pride and team pride, but for, in many cases, for the survival of their families, for the stakes, as I say. We're talking $60 million in prizes last year, and in this in the World Cup that's coming up starting next week, there's going to be $70 million in prizes.
I had a chance to watch the very first episode of this, and it was fascinating. Not necessarily a topic that I would normally spend a lot of time on, and I am curious how you pick your subjects. I mean, obviously you've had some that were ready-made. Of course, the Martha Stewart documentary got a lot of traction. There was just an announcement that your film company will be producing an Olivia Newton-John series, which I'm actually into. How do you pick your subjects?
Oh, well, as a filmmaker, we're really looking for stories that we can tell that not only give unique insight into the world that we're living in, but allow us to explore great themes. The Martha Stewart film was a movie about American womanhood. This series, Esports World Cup, Level Up, is about the formation of a whole new sport. And it's taking place in Saudi Arabia, in a fascinating part of the world, with these remarkable figures who are coming from all over the world to play at the height of their game. Martha Stewart, again, is a great platform for storytelling. Billie Eilish, who I made a film about when she was just 16 and 17 years old, gave us the opportunity not only to explore these 2 young artists, Billie and her brother, but to tell stories about family and what it means to have kids and to watch those kids who are remarkable artists come of age. Every film we make, we think of as the same way we would think of a scripted film. Films are exploring character, they're exploring drama, they're exploring high-stakes stories. And I think this is why, as you say, we're finding the audiences around the world are really embracing our films.
It's curious to me because at a time when celebrities are so much more directly accessible than when Romaine and I were growing up because of social media, why are celebrity documentaries doing so well? There's no shortage of information available on these folks. Why is there demand for this kind of specific content packaged in this way?
Well, again, I think it has to do with the fact that you're seeing filmmakers who are exploring these life stories in a way that is so satisfying. So you wouldn't really ask why were we so excited by a movie about Leonard Bernstein two Oscar seasons ago? Why were we so excited about a movie by Christopher Nolan about J. Robert Oppenheimer? Those are scripted movies that we understand we're going to be telling big cinematic stories. And with somebody like Martha Stewart, with somebody like Elton John, who we made a film about last year, with somebody like Billie Eilish, Olivia Newton-John, Anna Wintour, we have these opportunities to explore the lives of these extraordinary people who are performing at the height of their level and passion at what they do, and are doing everything they can to achieve greatness. And that's a lot of what who are having an enormous impact on the world. So these are people whose lives allow us to make great cinema and make great movies that people enjoy. So it's an exciting time to be working in our field.
RJ, at the same time, the production of those kinds of documentaries are a lot lower, the production costs, than traditional films that require a lot of CGI and a lot of special effects and all of that. Talk a little bit about how the business of Hollywood and the cost of producing content in Hollywood has influenced you in terms of how you look for your subject matter and how you tell your story.
I mean, the truth is that I started doing this in 1992 with The War Room, which was a film about Bill Clinton's presidential campaign, directed by D.A. Pennebaker and Chris Hedges. It was Oscar nominated. This was 33 years ago. And the conviction then was that nonfiction films could be a popular art form and command a big audience. And we are finding, with the advent of streaming services that can reach that big audience, that of course we were right. And as a result, there are resources to do this, because reaching you as an audience member with a film that only costs, you know, a few $1 million, as opposed to a film that costs tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, I'm still reaching you. And it's cost effective to the streamers with the right films, and it's also the audience return is fantastic. So you know, look, it's a complicated business for everybody in the entertainment world right now, but the streamers have proven that this is the popular art form we've known all along it was going to be, and that it was.
Yeah, and we've seen that in the streaming. We've even seen that in the podcast space. RJ, before we let you go, I do want to get your thoughts here on some breaking news that we had earlier today. That Anna Wintour, of course, the longtime editor of Vogue magazine, is going to relinquish her role as head of American editorial content. This is obviously a huge milestone, and you actually made a great documentary about her, really about Vogue, several years ago. I'm wondering if you just kind of reflect on the process of making that documentary and about somebody who is pretty much singularly identified with Vogue magazine.
Not just with Vogue magazine, but with Anna Wintour, you have somebody who's singularly identified with the fashion industry. And I think people need to realize what a monumental moment this is. Perhaps the greatest editor who ever lived of any magazine, certainly the single most influential figure in the global, multi-billion-dollar global fashion industry, Anna Wintour, who personally kind of stewarded the fashion industry, celebrated so many young designers, developed their careers, worked with the retailers to make sure that the industry thrived and survived difficult times like 9/11 in New York and other things like that. This is a titan. This is a woman who has gathered around her incredible talent for decades, devoted to her vision, and they've achieved at the highest level. And, you know, print journalism, as we know, and print magazines are changing, and with Anna's retirement, you're going to see a great other change. But I feel like today is a day where we must celebrate the remarkable achievement of her career, because we're unlikely to ever see a figure like her again.
RJ Cutler, really appreciate your joining us. RJ Cutler is the award-winning filmmaker. Thank you so much.
And probably the most famous bob cut in history.
Most famous bob cut?
Bob here.
Oh, on Anna Wintour. I thought you were talking about RJ. I was like, I didn't see a bob on him. But, you know.
Thanks, Scarlett.
I think about Anna Wintour and I just think about Meryl Streep and what she says. So the two don't meet necessarily. Coming up, big tech trying to break onto the big screen. That and more with IMAX CEO Richard Gelfond next. This is The Close on Bloomberg.
to the minute geopolitical news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Amory Hordern at the G7 in Alberta, Canada. This is Bloomberg.
We're at the epicenter of a global realignment on a scale not seen for decades. At the intersection between markets, economics, and geopolitics, a forum for sophisticated conversation. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Technology is embedded in every aspect of our lives.
And laying the foundation for the future.
From finance to defense, AI to entertainment.
And from the road to the stars. Bloomberg brings you the latest stories of the people and companies pushing the tech sector to new frontiers.
And the politics that shape global tech markets.
I'm Caroline Hyde in New York.
And I'm Ed Ludlow in San Francisco.
Watch Bloomberg Tech every weekday.
Only on Bloomberg Television.
Why do the biggest names in business choose Bloomberg Television?
That's a great question.
It's a very good question.
Interesting question. Good question.
Great question.
I so appreciate that question. You certainly ask interesting questions.
Bloomberg Television. Top experts, great questions.
In case you missed it on Bloomberg Surveillance.
They say you are in your right if you use Section 122. Why didn't you guys do that from the beginning?
Well, Section 122 only gives you 150 days.
In Section 122, if you use this now for 150 days, would it be a bridge to 301 or a bridge to 232? What are you thinking more long term?
You can be the strategist on that.
So just got to tell you one thing. You're not allowed to hire Anne-Marie. She's with us, all right? Don't miss Bloomberg Surveillance live every weekday.
Bloomberg loves earnings.
I know it's like your Super Bowl, right?
I can't wait. It's like opening presents in the morning.
All right, it will be exciting.
Nobody covers earnings like Bloomberg.
Apple is betting on the big screen. The tech giant's F1 film starring Brad Pitt lands in theaters tomorrow after an IMAX premiere earlier this week at Radio City Music Hall, as well as an early screening at the Monaco Grand Prix in May. This marks Apple's highest budget theatrical release ever, and a huge gamble after going back to the drawing board on its big ticket movie strategy last year. We're joined now live in studio by a key stakeholder in this release and in the overall film world. He is IMAX CEO Richard Gelfond. Richard, good to see you again.
Great to see you both again.
Absolutely.
So what's interesting for F1 is that Apple prioritized securing a release on IMAX before finding a studio partner for the movie. Do you chalk that up to Apple being a tech company first and that having that kind of tech mindset?
I chalk it up to the fact that we had really good box office experiences with Apple before. So when they did Napoleon, even though it wasn't filmed for IMAX, they released it in IMAX theaters, and the box office was really strong. And I also attribute it to the fact that Joe Kosinski, the director who did Top Gun, and Jerry Bruckheimer, the famous producer, had worked a lot in IMAX, and they knew that their vision would come across better. And frequently in IMAX, the filmmakers really, call those kinds of things. And they felt the best way to show it would be in IMAX. And as a matter of fact, Joe Kosinski built special IMAX cameras. On every car, there are 15 IMAX cameras, obviously miniature, and they're remote controlled. And if you saw it in IMAX, you would say, oh, I get it.
I'm glad you bring up Joe Kosinski, who's a longtime IMAX partner, and of course, Chris Nolan, another longtime IMAX partner as well. How do you go about finding new talent, new director talent? Do you go out to them and seek them out, or do they come to you?
Well, these days more they come to us because they've seen the results from things like Sinners or Oppenheimer. But we actively over the years have reached out. So we have seminars. We have an IMAX theater at USC Film School that the students actually work on and learn on. So we're always trying to generate, new IMAX fans and new IMAX filmmakers who want to work with us.
I'm curious too. I mean, with F1, you've already got some good kudos on this film from Lewis Hamilton, of course, who was involved in the production of it. But I thought it was interesting. He gave a whole interview about how difficult it was to film racing overall, particularly Formula One racing. And he talked about the use of the cameras, the positioning of those cameras, and how it gave a much more, the most realistic, in his view, realistic view of what F1 is really like, from not just the look of it, but the sound of it when it hits those turns. Is that because of the IMAX cameras being used from the start, or is that something that's done in post-production?
It's because it was used from the start. And in fact, the entire film was shot with IMAX digital cameras, every segment of it. And as I was describing the camera and the way it can be rotated, it's just really interesting from a viewer's point of view, because you're on a straightaway going into a turn, but they can, using remote controls, the cameras can pivot. So you really feel like you're in the race. As a matter of fact, last night I was at a screening of it, and a lot of people in the audience said, you know, they really felt like it in that way. And Lewis Hamilton said this is the closest he thinks people can get to feeling like what it's like to be in a race.
Yeah, and I haven't had a chance to see it, but I grew up on with open wheel racing, so I'm really curious to see like how much you were able to capture that. You've had quite a few movies come out this year in the U.S., but you've also had some considerable success in China. You have a movie out now, right now, She's Got No Name over there. You've got another big one that I think is anticipated to come out on July 5th, as well as a couple others. What has been the pickup in the Chinese market for IMAX films?
Well, you can't mention the Chinese market this year without Ne Zha 2. And that's a film that did over $2 billion. And to put that in context, no movie outside North America has ever done over $1 billion. So this was explosive growth. And I think probably pent-up demand because of the pandemic going on. Certainly a lot more invested in movies in China. And as you said, the slate this year is pretty good. The summer slate's very good. We also have a network of 800 theaters in China, which is a big part of their theater infrastructure. So we deliver very strong numbers. The brand is very well known, and the filmmakers really lean into it.
Speaking of theater infrastructure, I mentioned Radio City Music Hall earlier because IMAX built the first ever IMAX pop-up screen at the vaunted venue in order to air F1, to show F1. Is that something you could do anywhere in the world? And I wonder how much of that is something you'll be employing in new locations, destination locations, to really showcase the technology.
I think you only want to do it for a blockbuster movie, you know, one that you really has scope and scale. Because needless to say, I mean, it's not the most money, but it's expensive to do that. And two of my favorite, well, three. One was in the Tokyo Dome, where 30,000 people came for a premiere where we did an outdoor theater. We did one in the Great Wall of China, and that did really, really well doing it. And we've just done it. We've done it on ships. We've put them in all kinds of places. And I think it really helps the buzz about it. But one thing I wanted to mention also, we talked about the racing aspect of it. But F1, even if you're not a racing fan, it has a really good story. It's different, but it's like Top Gun in a racing car. So it really has a great
like
plot,
Days of Thunder.
interest, right? It's a really interesting movie.
The last time you were here, we were talking a lot about the idea of directors coming to you, and you gave a great anecdote about Tom Cruise and the latest Mission Impossible movie, which I did have a chance to see. And at the start of that movie, at least in the theater I was in, IMAX theater I was in, he basically gives a thank you to the audience, and he kind of extols the virtues of this is how movies should be made, and more importantly, this is how they should be seen. When you think about the future of how we consume movies, do you think that your technology, and for that matter, some of the competing technologies to IMAX, are going to be what keeps people going to the theaters rather than just watching at home?
I mean, I think it depends on the market. So obviously in really rural areas, you can't, the economics for an IMAX theater don't work. But in big cities and globally around the world, there's been a much bigger move to premium post-pandemic because people stream a lot more than they used to. And I think they got a little bored of streaming movies during the pandemic. So I think if they're going to go out, they want something special. And I think that applies to concerts and other things. So I do think the trend line will continue.
All right, Rich, always a great conversation. Always wonderful to have you. That's the CEO of IMAX, Richard Gelfond. All right, we continue to count you down to the closing bells. Just about 9 minutes until we get there. Scarlett, 61.43 is where the S&P stands right now. At one point in the day, we did trade above that record high of 61.44.
Yeah, and if we continue to move up into the close, as we are currently right now, there's a leg up. Maybe we'll get there, but I suspect as you get to these record highs, we'll bounce around and kind of flirt with it, but not quite pierce it until a couple of days later.
All right, you see the Magnificent Seven doing their best to keep the market afloat, and believe it or not, despite the fact that the rally off the lows in April has not been broad-based, the rally today certainly is. You see that reflected in a Russell 2000, up about 1.5% on the day. Garrett Melson joins us right now. He's portfolio strategist over at Natixis Investment Managers Solution. And Garrett, there's been a lot of talk about how much life there is left in what is a record rally as the S&P now crosses back above that record high from February. And I am curious if that is enough to pull you off the sidelines to maybe go overweight equities, or are you still comfortable staying neutral?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Romaine. You know, we certainly are cognizant of the risks for a continued grind to the upside here. You know, I think that's been a big driver over the last couple of weeks is just simply positioning. You know, we'd seen sentiment recover, but not get extended in the bullish direction. That's continued to play out. But I think the bigger story has been positioning from a systematics perspective. You just simply hadn't seen a lot of re-risking by a lot of the CTA and kind of more systematic investment strategies. That's been playing out, and I think that's helped to provide a kind of a stable bid to an uptrend in the market here. But I think the big issue for us in terms of chasing this is the fact that it still feels like the consensus is somewhat looking past the risks that we see in the market for the economic outlook. And that is to say that I think the Fed, as well as the market, is somewhat overly sanguine on the growth backdrop, and specifically with respect to the labor market. And so I do think we're somewhat setting ourselves up for a little bit of vulnerability here as we move through the summer months. Just when we look under the surface of the labor market, it certainly looks like cooling, and that could be a little bit of a scope for a pullback here over the next couple months.
We definitely saw some evidence of that in the continuing claims numbers that we got out of those weekly initial jobless claims figures. But there is a question here, Garrett. I mean, it's one thing to have maybe some cracks in the economy or slight softness. It's another thing to have sort of a wholesale drop in consumption and economic activity. I am curious as to where you believe the economy is going. Is it going to move towards that sort of downward extreme, or is it just going to be something where maybe just some cracks around the edges?
Yeah, it's a very good distinction to make, and we're certainly not in the recession camp, and we weren't earlier this year. It's just simply a reflection of where we view the risks in the economy relative to the consensus. And there, I think it's simply a story of the path of travel for the economy here is one of slowly cooling activity, I think. And until I think the Fed starts to really pull forward those cuts, I think it's going to be a theme of basically growth at or modestly below trend for the foreseeable future here. So the risk, obviously, is one of passive tightening from the Fed. The fact that if we do continue to see this cooling and we don't see the Fed coming off the sidelines here, that's just simply exacerbating that cooling. But at the end of the day, I do think that the Fed has shown time and again that they are very reactive. They're willing to pivot on the data. And so I think that ultimately puts in a floor for just how much cooling we can see. But I do think it does set the market up for the potential for maybe not a growth scare, but a little bit of a growth startle.
You're certainly cautious, and I suspect a lot of institutional investors are as well. So when you look at this stock rally and who's driving it, retail investors, how much more, I guess, for lack of a better word, dry powder do they have to continue driving equity prices higher?
Yeah, you know, again, when we look at a lot of the sentiment data, we look at the flow data, you haven't seen a significant amount of inflows chasing into this rally. And you certainly haven't seen sentiment get overly extended in here. So, you know, I think there is quite a bit of dry powder on the sidelines that does put in a pretty good case for some upside in here. And it is why I think, you know, we certainly don't want to be significantly underweight equity risk in here, because I do think that is a risk here over the next couple of weeks that, you know, you don't have a whole lot of risk of maybe the labor market falling out of bed overnight. So that does set you up for maybe a little bit of a steady grind up here. But in terms of really chasing the rally, I think there's some the potential for a more attractive entry point, and that's when we start to see a little bit of a shift in the narrative coming back from this exuberance. Maybe not exuberance, that might be a little extreme of a term here, but optimism and starting to price in the reality of that cooling that is underway.
So Garrett, we're looking at small caps right now outperform big caps. The Russell 2000 up by 1.6%, and over the past month they've actually done better than big caps. But beyond that, they've been eternal laggards for the past 1 year, past 3 years, past 5 years, past 10 years. What actually catalyzes outperformance in this group? And I suspect you're going to say earnings. So at what point do the earnings come through? Is this something that we can see later this year?
Yeah, I think that's a tricky story, right? It's been a tough case for small caps because they certainly are more rate sensitive. And so when you price in lower rates, that should help the small cap story. The problem is over the past year or so, we've been pricing in lower rates because of slower growth. And so you kind of have this heads I win, tails you lose dynamic from reverse. It's a double whammy on small caps. I do think, though, as you look into the back half of the year, I think there is a potential that as the Fed starts to ease, you start to price in more of that cutting, that starts to stabilize growth expectations here. That might start to move in a more positive direction for small caps, one where you actually see easier financing rates that alleviate some of those pressures from a margin perspective. Yeah. And then on the flip side, a little bit more support from a top line perspective as growth starts to stabilize and those expectations start to rise.
Garrett, got to leave it there. Always a pleasure. Garrett Melson, portfolio strategist at Natixis Investment Managers Solutions, helping us count you down to those closing bells. Just about 3 minutes to go, and seeing a lot of buying activity as we move closer to the close, potentially maybe off of a headline that just crossed the Bloomberg terminal that the Treasury Secretary of the United States has formally asked Congress to remove the so-called Section 899. This is that so-called revenge tax provision that a lot of people were afraid would actually discourage foreign investment in U.S. markets. Scott Bessent making that comment in a social media post on X, saying he asked both the Senate and the House to remove Section 899 from the budget bill.
So once you remove that, does that revive this idea of American exceptionalism? We haven't used that term to describe the rally that we're seeing this time around. But remember, earlier in the year, that was very much intact.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things in that bill that I think were scaring markets, but that was a big one, too, because like I said, you were Xing out a huge potential population of potential buyers. 61.45 and change right now on the S&P 500, above its record high. A full breakdown of all of today's market action, that starts right now.
The Closing Bell, Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close, starts right now.
And right now, we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostick here with Scarlett Fu, taking you through to the closing bell with a global simulcast. Carol Massar and Tim Stenovic joined us now from the radio booth. Welcome to our audiences across all of our Bloomberg platforms, including our partnership with YouTube. It was 61.44. That was the high on the S&P 500 back in February. As of right now, Carol Massar, don't jinx it, the S&P is trading above it.
No, it just went below it. So it's like, we're right there. We're right there. Don't blame me. Don't blame me. But listen, we've been fixated, right? But it's pretty interesting to see quite a rally underway, and investors seem to be pretty enthusiastic, and there's some expectations of some Fed rate cuts, so maybe that's helping out a little bit.
Yeah, 2 decimal places is where things go in our data, so we could still be at a record even if we are at 61.44, depending on the decimal places. I asked this question to Eric Weiner earlier, who covers markets for our Equities Americas team, and he's essentially saying something that I think Scarlett and you said earlier this week, which is that everyone's betting that this 90-day pause that expires on July 9th gets extended by a significant period of time, because what is not priced in are those tariffs going back up in just a few days.
Absolutely. And of course, we got the headline just moments ago that the Treasury will exclude U.S. companies from some taxes imposed by other countries. That's the deal with the G7 in exchange for removing the revenge tax bill from President Trump's one big beautiful bill. That seemed to be the impetus for the last minute rally.
It gets to the idea, though, too, of how many loose ends are out there. You mentioned trade. Obviously, we're talking about this budget bill, which still has to be addressed. And then there's still the geopolitical issues, but certainly not as much chaos and uncertainty as we had a couple of months ago. And that, of course, might be a big part of the reason why we've continued to see such strength in U.S. financial markets, including on this Thursday afternoon. The S&P 500 has now rallied about 23% from those April lows back on April 8th, and it looks like today it's going to settle right around 61.44 and change. That would be below the all-time record high of 61.44.15, but I think folks will take it. A gain of 0.8 0.8% on the day. The Dow adding 400 points, or 0.9%. The NASDAQ Composite up a percentage point on the day. The NASDAQ 100, a fresh record high, up more than 200 points, or 0.9%. And the Russell 2000, believe it or not, that's your outperformer, Carol Masser, up more than 35 points, or 1.7%.
Yeah, interesting to see, right, that outperformance, and maybe that reads, some expectations about the domestic economy. Having said that, if you dig into the S&P 500, we've seen more names in the index